controller. The next step in our process is we need to add a table view into this. We're going to learn about table views and table view controllers for a second. Now, a table view is a very interesting UI view, a subclass of UI view that has a lot of functionality built into it for us. So first off, I'm going to create a private variable for a UI table view. We'll just call it my table view. Now that I've created my table view, or made a variable for it at least, I'm going to come over to my view.load and say my table view equals UI table view, allocate some memory, initialize it, and we're going to initialize it with a frame and with a table view style. So for this, I'm just going to do self.view.bounds. You may want to use auto layout using the visual format language in order to make it scale back and forth between portrait and landscape nicely. Now, a table view has a property called the UI table view style. So if I'm going to command click on that and then click on enum, we can see that we can either use a plain or a grouped. For this tutorial, we're going to use a plain table view. I've created that, and I do a self.view add subview my table view. Now when I build and run that, let's see what happens. I now have a table view in there, but I have no data. It has the cool scrolling ability that's built into a table view. But now I need to populate that with data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an NS array. And we haven't talked about arrays at this point very much, but I'm just going to create a simple array with a simple string inside of it. So my array equals, I'm doing the quick version of creating an array where it allocates and initializes the array with an object. And we're just going to call it test. Now that I've got an array, I need to tell my view controller what it's going to be doing with the table view. So a table view in the .h file has two things that we need to add. One is a UI table view data source and a UI table view delegate. Now a data source is what's going to describe the data that we're going to show in the table view. When I command click on that, you can see that this is a protocol defining the UI table view data source. And then we can see that it has some methods that are required and some methods that are optional. We can see that there are two specific methods that are required. One is table view number of rows in section. So that's going to tell us how many rows are going to be in that section of the table view. The second one is cell for row at index path. That's going to describe for us the cell that is going to display. So the data source is really describing the data, whether it's the number of rows or what the cell is going to look like. The table view delegate now is going to describe other things regarding interaction with the cell and how it's displayed. So you can see we have all of these are optional. Will display header view, footer view, but the most important one that we're going to deal with today is Command F did select row at index path. What that does is it tells us when a user has tapped on a table view cell. So we're going to implement those three methods we talked about. The two that are required for the UI table view data source, and the two that are required, or the one that we want to implement for the delegate. So I'm going to come over here, and my table view now has a delegate property that I need to set to self. And my table view.dataSource equals self as well. Now what those are telling the table view is that the delegate methods, this view controller is going to handle those delegate methods. And the same thing with the data source. So now I'm going to do my dash table view. I'm going to scroll down until I find my number of rows at index path, or in section. And then I'm going to return array.count. This is going to return all of the objects, at least a count of them, and tell the table view how many rows we need. Next thing I'm going to do is do table view cell for row at index path. And we remember that cell for row at index path is describing what the cell is going to do and look like. Now we can see that the first one we did, the number of rows, is returning an integer. Now this one is returning an object or a pointer to that object of a UI table view cell. So in our case, we're going to create a UI table view cell, call it cell. We're going to say table view DQ reusable cell with identifier. Now one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is one of the difficulties with developing developing mobile apps is we have to be cognizant of the memory usage. So with this, what we're trying to say is we're going to try and reuse this cell and just change out the things that we need to so that we're not using up as much memory. But we may have a problem where we try and DQ a reusable cell and there isn't one. So we need to do a check to say if there isn't a cell, then cell equals UI table view cell, allocate and initialize, except for we're going to initialize it with a style. So UI table view cell style default and a reuse identifier that matches the other one. That way we have a cell that's going to have the same reuse identifier and will be able to be reused. Next, I'm going to return cell. Now, a table view cell, if I command click on it, has some interesting information about it and properties. We can see that a table view by default, a table view cell already has a UI label. In fact, it has two of them, a text label and a detailed text label. It already also has a UI image view. We haven't gone over image views, but that's how we're going to display images. So I'm going to come back to my code. I'm going to do cell.textLabel.text equals, and now I need to get that data, that string out that I want to display. So first I'm going to do an ns string to display equals array object at indexPath.row. And what I did there is a quick way to be able to grab the position that I want. So every row in the table has an index path, it's called, where it has a section and a row. In this one, I know I only have one section, so I'm just going to get back the row. I know that in my array up here, I've only got strings in there, so I know what I'm getting back is a string. So I'm going to set that text label.text to a string to display. Put my semicolon, build and run. Bring my simulator up, and we can see that now I have a test in there that's showing. That's the exact text that I expected to see. So the next thing I'm going to do is implement that delegate method that we talked about. So I'm going to do table view. I'm going to find the did select, not did deselect, but did select row at index path. And then I'm going to just do an ns log and say I selected this. I'm going to do another thing to do table view deselect row at index path. And yes, I want it to be animated. When I build and run this, now when I click on that test, you can see that it highlights and goes away. Down here in the debugging console, you can see that the I selected this method or string is printed out. We know that this is getting touched now. Now we just need to go one step farther with it and actually do something with it. Next, I'm going to create a new file. I did this by going a two-fingered click or a right click, going new file, or I can go up to file, new file. And that'll bring me to the same place. Do cancel on that. So I've got this, it brings up my template. I need to make sure I'm under iOS and source, and then I select the Cocoa Touch class. Not to be confused, if we come down into OS X, there's a Cocoa class. We want to make sure that we have the iOS Cocoa Touch class. You can see that it's got the C there. I could choose a Swift file, but since I'm doing this, I want to stick with my Objective-C. We're going to come down here and change it from a UI table view cell to a UI view controller. I'm going to call it detail view controller. I'll create that in my project. And then I'm just going to change the background. Self.view.background. Background color equals UI color, yellow color. Now what we want to do, we've put in our navigation controller. We want to select a table view cell and then have it actually move over to this new view controller. So I'm going to import this view controller, do an import of detail view controller. Come down here and I've got to create a detail view controller now. If I can select everything correctly, detail view controller. We're going to call it DVC. I usually shorten the view controller's name down to just the camel case letters. I'm going to create a detail view controller. I'm just going to call new on it, which we know will allocate and init it. Now my navigation controller has a really nice helper method, so I'm going to use self.navigationController. I'm just going to push view controller DVC, and I want it to be animated. And now just like that, I've got a second view controller that we've added. I've added a table view. Now I can click test and it goes over to my new view controller. I can display whatever I want there and then just click back and I've got all my information there. So this was a simple tutorial on how to set up a table view, how to incorporate an array to be able to control what's displaying, and then to be able to show how to create a new view controller, which we'll use in the